Hi everyone, I'm Xiao Yun, co-founder of Artists Caravan. My art practice revolves mostly around creating relief sculptures into installation in spaces. I also like photography, writings, working with people, and I incorporate all these elements into my working process as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Mei Hsien. I'm also one of the co-founder for Artists Caravan. So I work with portraits and human figures. So my earlier works are printmaking works. So rather later or recent works are more deal with so-called found materials as well as self-portraits, etc. So I was fascinated by artists Francis Bacon and as well as some of the sculptors that I will mention later.
Hi Mei Hsien, your artworks are of great interest to me because you have been working around the theme of crisis for some time. Then the urgency can be felt more keenly now with the current crisis of the COVID-19 situation, both locally in Singapore and globally. Your investigations on communications are also for me kind of magnified from personal to public, domestic to workspaces, and perhaps even political bodies. So from here, I would like to begin with quoting from your statement. For example, you said that all our family members, including myself, were terribly bad in articulation. While trying to express our thoughts with each other, we ended up with conflicting information not communicated or expressed in an open channel. I have to read between the lines of their conversation and hand gesture to guess what they really want to communicate. When I reflected at the end of the day, I will end up saying to myself, I rather talk to my plants than talk to human. And then I find that secondly, you use your own body in almost all of your works in the zine. So I have two questions from here. First question is, how has it been for you to have this part of your personal life revealed to a public audience? And then secondly is, was there any form of internal struggle or conflict within yourself?
In fact, this is the very first time that I work on my own internal issues. So during the time when I'm working my works, I really have no idea where to start with. So I started with found materials like human figures, cats, and glass bottles that's lying around my workplace. So they are kind of out of spontaneous at just trying out with the figures and all that. So I quite enjoy that moment of exploration of materials. I would say internal struggle, everyone have their own internal crisis or struggle. So in a way, this is a chance for me to actually speak to myself, explore a bit of how I felt at that moment. So in fact, that is the first time I self-indulge on myself. So that probably could be the first time, could be the last time, I wouldn't know. So, and that was quite enjoyable and to get to know more by myself on like in terms of communication crisis that I mean everyone have their own internal communication crisis with their family, friends or colleagues, things like that. So it all happened that few months was quite tough for me. So that's why I express it through my series of works.
So these few months, was it recently or?
Starting beginning of the month, so I felt the kind of struggle or kind of internal kind of conflicts within myself and my family's members, things like that. So with people in general.
I find your title, Evolving Crisis Series, to be actually very interesting. It says evolving, and it almost sounds like crisis is always gaining momentum on itself and move forward from a past phase. At the same time, it also addressing immediate huge problems that we are facing. So do you feel that we are not actually making headway in addressing these problems, such as climate change and interpersonal relationship?
Definitely. I think that a lot of people are quite self-centered, is evolving around their own problems and thinking that their own problems are the biggest problem of all, but not really thinking about the environment, about people around them. So in terms, so I was saying that this whole series of work are very self-indulgent. So in fact, I'm reflecting upon myself, my own actions, and then hoping that I also want to bring bigger attention to the audience that we should not be so self-centered. So we should open up for a bigger picture into looking at other current world crisis problems. So like, especially right now, climate change, like you said, COVID-19, things like that. So we should care more for the environment, for the climate, things like that. So, and rather constantly reflecting and questioning our own actions, how it impact the world and people around us. So I know that everyone have their own internal struggle, crisis, but we shouldn't be really deep down into our own issues. Rather that I keep as questioning myself whether am I exaggerating my own problem, my own crisis, or I overreacting to it. So am I the root to all the suffering that I'm feeling right now, or do I need to open up for a bigger picture? So in this series, I keep reflecting back to myself as well, and also looking at other global issues, things like that. That I hope that in future I can address that in my works, or probably in terms of physical actions, and bring this message to everyone.
So you do feel that personal responsibilities are very important for your work. And then do you feel that with all this self-portrait, right, you're actually, like what you have said, right, for yourself, a part of you that doesn't really want to be self-indulgent, but at the same time also you feel that it's also to help to raise awareness towards others, for them to take on responsibility as well, right? So okay, so that brings me to another next question. Is it often that you feel that communication is the key? At the same time, communication is the bridge to understanding, but also is a hindrance to progress. So we can say that it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Like, what do you think about like this?
I think a lot of people have their own self-assumption on what the other people are thinking, what they know what we are thinking. So it's more of like a self-assumption. So I would say that a lot of things we are not used to communicate in wide open arms to ask direct questions or bring some attention to the things that we want to address. So I think a lot of times we have a lot of miscommunication because of the hindrance with the kind of question that we ask and not asking directly. So in fact, so that's where my very first word crisis communication crisis, that was the very first work that I do with the figures. That was the
Can I share
that
the
was
work?
what
Can
sure,
I
sure.
share the work?
Yes, sure. So this series is called Communication Crisis. So I work around with the alphabet C. So as you see, the different photos are built around the word C. So I'm also working with the figures as well as the transparent glass jar, which I find it very interesting. So the figures are sometimes inside and sometimes they are outside. And most of the time, the animals are inside this so-called cage, which the humans like to, place them in their own domestic place and etc. So in fact, this material that I'm exploring is quite interesting, and this adds like a protective layer that's created by man, but although it's created by man, but it's invisible to their own eyes, meaning that it's very contradicting in this series whereby human wants to be closer to humans or to animals, but yet we are aware of the distance that we ourselves have been creating for ourselves or for others as well. So this invisible kind of so-called barriers, which is always constantly around everyone, which I felt that we are unaware of it. So that's why I would like to highlight this, that also brings back to the communication crisis. So this is kind of like, to me, I'm quite frustrated with this kind of barrier where I couldn't communicate or convey my message across. So it's just kind of like, it's yet so near, but yet it's so far away from the person that you want to communicate with. So that's what I was trying to express using this works, this series, and how they are praised as well.
Yeah, okay. So we are still at this work. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about some of their positions, right? Such as we can see some of them are upside down. I think you have to move the cursor a bit down, right?
Okay.
Yeah, for example, the man on the last one, right? His position is upside down. And then sometimes he's like plank, hanging in the middle of like no mid-air. And then sometimes it's like lying sideways. So do they mean anything?
I deliberately play with the position of the figures to make it is still back to the communication that we are trying to bring across to the person. So the different perspective or position that I'm trying to portray here is that the human stubbornness and persistent to the effort that they are trying to bring across the message through different ways, different channels, but in the inability to identify that is their own fault rather than changing the way of channels. But they never looked inside that, in fact, all the problems lie with ourselves. So that's what I want to say on this road. So it's more like this transparent glass also mirror the kind of our own actions or image back to the surface. So also a reminder to reflect on our own actions, on our own inner thought.
Okay. I was just like looking at the animal figurines, right? Are you like trying to say something about the relationship of man and nature, or like the relationship of animals in our daily life?
Animals, in the sense that humans has been exploiting animals in the sense that we for our own self-interest, and exploiting in the sense that we for our own self-interest, meaning we kind of like imprison them, to put them in zoo or place in circles, things like that. So to benefit the human in the sense that as well as people, humans also captured animals for the sake of their meat, etc., etc.
Okay, we have a question from Joey. She's asking whether there is any specific type of communication we are talking about. Is it language or is it like dialogue?
Language. I would say a lot of thoughts that are not portrayed, like more like self-assumption. So a lot of things we don't ask is about spoken word or spoken communication that is lacking in my life. I would say that I'm quite bad with this, and I probably need to improve on that. Yeah.
You also mentioned like that you rather talk to plants than talk to animals. So I find the typography to be very interesting, right? For example, we see the red color, IS. So why IS, and what are their implications on your self-portrait? And then also the green letterings, ELF, right? So because you say that you rather talk to plants than to animals, so do you actually imagine yourself to be in another world, like in a movie where the plants become anthropomorphic and given human characteristics? And also, would you mind revealing your secret conversations with your plants and share with us?
Sorry to burst your fantasy or your imagination of me talking to the plants. In fact, it's just like a quotation that I think it fits well to this. At that moment, I don't really want to talk to humans. Humans are irritating, and I just want to be alone. That's where the quotation came about. So at that time, I don't really talk to my plants at all. So I look at them, I felt very calm when I'm looking at them. I think that they know how I feel. When I look at them, I assume again. So yeah, so when it was just an intuitive moment that I was late staying at my office. So I took this self-portrait very spontaneously. So I took a few photos using my self-timer. So that's about, I felt very peaceful when I was looking at it, and I think that they know what I feeling inside. So, and I don't really talk to them at all. So and you also mentioned that the I and the self. So I always keep on questioning back to the question of I. What is really me, and how do people identify me? My name, my Mei Hsien, or my 5 features that make up my face. So it's more like that kind of identity, self. So so I reflect back, am I doing better now, or am I doing worse than before? So it's a question back to self again. So this whole series is all about self-indulgence. So and you can see so much of my faces in my series, which I think could be the first and my last time doing this series. Yeah. So that's quite fun, but I really get sick of looking at my artworks right now. So okay.
Thank you for sharing.
No problem.
That's so interesting. Okay, I want to just go down to the next artwork.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so for the left hand one, right? A lot of your fragmented faces, we actually still see a lot of strong association with typography, right? So although you already explained that that I is referring to yourself, right? But I was wondering whether is it more than just your physical self? Like, is there some kind of like psychological phenomenon of you? And then the eye, right? This is just my comment. It seems like it's like a pun of the eye, right? The eye organ, because I can see a lot of your eyes and your face are fragmented. So when I talk about psychological phenomenon, so are they reflective of human emotion to some extent, not just yourself, but like communications that is causing a lot of stress to everyone around, that you actually rather feel more peaceful with your plants and at that moment find some solace just being there with the plants. And yeah, could you maybe elaborate a little bit more?
So the fragmented kind of faces actually also reflect back to my roles as a daughter, as a sister, as a friend, as a girlfriend, or etc. So we as human play multiple roles in our life. So I would say so reflecting back, I am in fact very overly concerned about the people around me and things like that. So when I look back at my own roles, am I doing too much for them? Am I neglecting myself? So it's a bit of others and I and self relationship between me and others. So that's where, in fact, this photo doesn't came right from the start. When I exploring the words, as I mentioned, the different alphabets, crisis, CRISIS. So this I came about, and I immediately think of this photo which I took last year when I was in Penang Glass Museum. So this two photos, which this one and the one beside on the right, these two photos are taken from the museum. So in fact, yeah, that's how it fitted into this series, the I. So that's why I use this photo to represent that identity that I like to explore my roles in different roles that I have in. Yeah.
Okay, so these photos are taken individually. I just want to explore on your working process. So when you are taking them, right, and then when you talk about the different roles that you feel, right, does the facial expression has any relation to the roles?
Not at all. It's just like fragmented. In fact, like I mentioned, I didn't intend to use this photo as part of my artwork. So that was quite a later stage where I selected this photo as part of my artworks.
So it's more organic and...
Yes, correct. And then for the photo right at the right side, it's actually quite interesting that when I saw the exhibit and I ran straight directly to make this posture, and my friend was laughing so loud, and then none of them are taking photo for me. So I was there at that posture for more than 10 seconds. So they all laugh out, burst out. So in fact, I don't know why intuitively I just wanted that posture, and then with the snake and things like that. So it came quite funny lah. So but then when I look back, why am I so why I added that way? Or could it be the snake as a kind of the symbolic snake that made me have that kind of posture? Am I in struggle with the snake and things like that? So that I when I came back, I relooked at this photo again. Yeah, that snake is I have this affinity with people who were born in the year of snake. So that's why I kind of like I felt I was in struggle with this group of people. that also came fit into the word struggle and not and snake, etc. So yeah.
So you mean just now you were talking about the people you're having struggle with. So and the snake, is there any relationship because there is also a tiger, right?
Yes.
And then there's a giraffe. There is also a goat.
It happened
but this
background,
it's particularly like not flat, right?
Yes.
So it just so happened.
It just so happened that it was the exhibit was the animals exhibit, and then the front was the snake, where anyone can just pose with the snake. So yeah.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. In your past work, right, you work a lot with natural and found materials. Is this your first time you develop self-portrait?
Yeah, just
in
came
your work?
on very like you mentioned, organic, very organic. So it was that moment of time I need to do something to release my internal tensions. That's about it. Yeah.
Okay. So it's because your current work, like in this Zine series, is a lot more using a lot of different elements, yeah, and they are more complex uh, compared to your line works, right? Your line works are also different layers put together, right?
Yes.
Okay. So can you share with us some of your influence for this series of works?
For this series of work, so it's still back to the word crisis. So it's actually a recurring themes at different stage of life. So as with age, crisis take on a different meaning and probably a bigger role or different roles in different stage of life. So when I look at crisis, I look at my own failures, my own struggles, things like that. So this series that isn't much of influences, it just all came very naturally when and how I wanted to work with found objects. So it all came from the objects that's around me, and I just took them, and just coincidentally that I found these few photos that fit into my alphabets, and that's why I used them. So it was not planned initially. So it was not really influenced by any other works. So it's more about my own indulgence on my own feelings, my own struggle at the time, at the moment of time. So
Yeah, but putting them together also takes a lot of time, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
in fact, the very first work on Lucas is the last work that I finished the whole series. So I couldn't find something that start with to kick off with the whole series. So I started to look at my own works, taking myself looking at my own works. So with the lines, that is also one of my themes in all my past works. So I use the thread as part of my lines to link different channels of communication. So when people have bottles, like putting right at the ears to listen to another person, like seashell. So it reflects to me the bottles like seashells that people trying to listen to another people from another part of the world or another in different distance. So to say, so the lines adds a kind of like channels to communicate, convey things to another people, another person.
Okay, so my last question
Okay.
would be, do you think you might, although you say that this might be your last series in which you will actually use yourself, but actually because I feel that you use your body a lot in this work, do you actually think that you might go into performance art in the future?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah. A lot of people think that I can act very well, or being in friends, in groups, they find that I'm very comical. So I probably do some very funny, I don't know, some performance maybe in future that I wouldn't know. So based on situations, I might do something that in future.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you.
We look forward to that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so we shall move to Xiao Yun. So my first question for you is that I understand that you have been studying Buddhism for quite some time, maybe a couple of years or even more. So has Buddhism course that you have completed recently played a very major part in your works, and also share with us some of your influence in these works that you have presented?
Okay, some of it, yes. Back then, my master research was on early Indian and Sri Lanka Buddhist sculptures, and some of them were in caves and stone sculptures, and some of them are architectural monuments. So the small relief sculptures form part of the larger architectural monuments, which are supporting histories and stories of Buddhism, and sometimes they contributed or are commissioned by the lay people communities. So actually, this also informs me that art is an interactive process that contributes to something bigger than just ourselves, and it leaves traces and imprints through historical process, which is also very much present today. And there are also many other Buddhist teachings which are universal in general, and they interweave with some of the concepts on my mind map and the use of found and repurposed objects. So these concepts will be like the investigation of perception, the body and the mind. And another major influence will be language. For example, the substitution of one word for another and contradictions. Okay, and then some of my other influence will come from the past work that I have done. So it's actually a continuous process of my art practice. And I like the works of many artists, but for this particular series, right, the influence will be like Thomas Hsien, Richard Tuttle, Eva Hess, Sarah Zi, and some others. And then some of my other influences will be the use of industrial material, because it's actually related to my job of 20 years and my identity as a woman. Yeah.
So I'm actually quite interested in, from all your works, I'm quite interested in your mapping 01. So could you share with us your thought process, and did they come first before the other sculptures that you did, or are they done simultaneously together?
Okay, actually the mind map and the sculptures are quite separate. But in terms of the studies of the flow of movement in relation to time and motion, conceptually they are quite similar. And then the process...
Can we share the mind map to
okay, so as I say, right, the process base of building the sculptures comes with time, right? So dismantling them and putting them together in different configuration mean that I was moving along, and also the objects were also moving along on how I would want them to be placed. And then the spaces, right, between the objects, and also even the highlight of even smaller spaces between among the objects in the sculptures.
Okay.
So the thought process is accumulation of works which I have done since early 2000. I'm going to go back to the mind map. Back then I was doing some research on conservation in Singapore. And then from there, I did photographs of progress of conservations and some series of works on reliefs all related to conservation. But then recently, I began to move deeper away from social dimension, right, related to conservation, and examine the time process with regards to memory processing, which can be seen from this mind map. Yeah, I'm going to share more about the mind map. Actually, the mind map is quite difficult and it took me a long time. I think all of these, right, are related to the deeper studies of our bodies and life in general and the way we perceive the world. Mei Hsien did ask me about the folding in and folding out of shared knowledge. I'm going to just explain a bit more. So the folding in and folding out of shared knowledge is also related to conservation. So when individuals share their memories and knowledge of places, objects, and history, right, they share a part of their understanding of the places and spaces with others. So it's an accumulation of pool of knowledge from everyone. And then accessing this information changes the way we view places, spaces, and objects. And from there on, we also build our own processing of these informations. Hence, shared knowledge is accumulated. And then this mind map are layers of analysis on bodily movement related to time, memories anchored on the body, past and present. I use different elements such as the quotes, and then these are copyright-free photographs. And then these are drawings of movement. This is a hand here, which will refer to actually the dissection of movement and the dissection of motion, which this one here is a long exposure of lights, moving lights actually. And so there are actually studies of movement itself. So I use terms, right? There are terms such as scenes and then screens, right? To mean the slices of memories that intrude into our mind. So it's almost like popping out from nowhere, like in a stream of thoughts. And then the scenes and screens will be like images that just appear into the mind. They are related to the studies of perception. And to me, perception are twofold. So they can either refer to the eye organ, or they can also refer to our mind process, our thinking or non-thinking as well. So for these quotes, right, I choose quotation on a conversation between David Bourne and Charles Biederman, because David Bourne is a scientist who emphasized originality is a creative process, and Charles Biederman is a structuralist artist who is looking into the presenting of structures of nature through abstraction. And he was actually looking for a breakthrough in the way art could present nature. For example, like Monet in Impressionism and Cézanne in Cubism. And then this one here is a quotation from Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna, who examined the person that is in movement. And also, you can't see the quotation here, so thanks to Mei Hsien's suggestion, I have actually put in a QR code, which if anyone is interested, they could just scan and view the quotation in full. Yeah.
So actually you explained the word scenes and screens. So how about the different color tapes? You want to explain more on that?
The color tapes, right? This one here, blue color, red color,
yes.
blue color, this one. Actually, they are corresponding to the quotation, which refers to the past, present, and future. And also, this is the blue light and the red light. So the tapes, right, they correspond to the images of these lights and also correspond to the quotation. So basically, they are actually drawn from the quotation, which try to use a visual explanation on the past, present, future. And these are installation tapes, right? And then again, Mei Hsien, she actually provided like some insights to me a while back when we were like discussing on this. And she actually mentioned that the tapes suggest electrical signals moving from one point to another, and then actually eventually lighting up the light bulbs. So I thought it was a very interesting way of interpreting, but because I actually wasn't thinking of that, yeah. And then the empty space here, right, which was formed by the tape, represents space where memory deposits of possible past and future as symbolized by the red tape and the blue tape. So actually it's a 3D, it's a 3D space. And then like I said earlier, right, the scenes and the screens would actually refer to mean the slices of memories that intrude into our mind or projections from our mind as well. So this conservation here could refer to protection, and also the consolidation of our self and identity. Yeah. Okay, I can actually elaborate more about the scenes and the screens. Right. So the movement here, right, all this actually represents movement. So when a body moves into a space, right, orientate themselves inside the space. So the space will be constantly bombarded with all these images. So this could be a rough idea of what it could possibly mean. Yeah. Yeah, I hope I have explained.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, so anything more to elaborate on this? If not, I can go back to your sculptures.
I can elaborate some more, but it will refer to other things. So maybe you just move on.
Okay. Can you show us the sculptures on the next page? Yeah. So so I would like to ask, like, do you have any mental image or any structure for the sculpture that you're creating? And how long do you took to assemble or finalize the outcome of your final sculptures?
These sculptures also took me a long time actually. These photographs, right, the works, for now they are completed, but because I have already dismantled them, right? So if I put back, I either have to look at a photograph and build them again. If not, they will change again. So they aren't really necessarily completed in real time. Actually, I would like to make them more complex. As to whether there's a mental image, I don't have a mental image of structure in my mind when I was creating them. So I use one object first. So for example, for this field, right, I actually started with the pallet wood. This pallet wood here, right? And then all these are also from the pallet wood. They are actually cut out. And then I did some treatment to the pallet wood, smooth them out, and then clean them up. And then I will move on to another object. And then such as all these different things you see here, like cupboard, and then the tablecloth. Yeah. And then I will build them and then arrange them, rearrange them again and again until I think that they look okay. Okay, so I was actually in my mind, right? Although there's no per se like an endpoint for the sculptures, right? But rather the thought process was that I was trying to balance them like an abstract painting. So the materials that I used were available to me at that time. So they were actually used, right, to form broad lines, small lines, and then broad color shapes, and then different feelings such as the cardboard here, which gives a more warm feeling, and then the texture of the wood also gives a more warm feeling, and then the metal piece here, the copper wire here would give a more detached and cooler feeling. Yeah.
Okay. So how about, can you share with us how do you come about selecting the materials? Are they do they symbolize any meaning behind the materials that you have chosen?
Yeah. For this, right, I know I wanted to use repurposed object. So in my workplace, right, I found that there were a lot of pallet woods I explained earlier, right, and then clean them out and etc. And then I also observe daily the things that I can collect for my workplace. So they actually included pneumatic tubes, which actually is another sculpture, but I didn't put it here. So yeah. And then I think people might interpret symbolic meanings into them because after all, they are actually shapes. But it's up to them. What I wanted to show was also a more feminine side to these industrial objects. So I actually used tablecloth, which is a domestic object. And I made a copper wire framework, which actually to me, it looks like a uterus. I will share another image, which is a work process image. This was the copper wire initially, and I bought this from a hardware shop.
Is that a pendulum?
Yeah, that is a pendulum. I tried to play with it for a while. It's quite interesting. I did this, right, and then I thought it really looks like it feels like a uterus to me. And then, but I didn't use this piece even at the end because I thought it was quite flat. In the end, I decided to just leave it here instead, and then added more of a flowy line, just to break away, just to bring these two together, and then also to create some kind of more flow and curvy line to break away from the entire shape at the same time to link them together.
So with the different shapes that you say, you're not conscious about the kind of shapes, because I'm seeing that a lot of squares, rectangular. So these are not part of your selection of materials lah. So they came quite naturally on like what you have found around your place. Yeah. Is that how it is? How they are presented or assembled together?
Some yes, some no.
Okay.
From the start, right, when I was going to do this, I was exploring on the membrane, right, when we did our first sharing. So from the membrane, right, I move on to shapes. And then, there's the golden section, right? So I began to explore on the pentagon shape, which is also part of the golden section. So there was this basis of the pentagon shape being used, and also the division of its parts here. You see this is also pentagon shape actually, but I form a square here, so it will look a bit different. And then from there on, I added more shapes. Choosing this shape and then making them into an organized shape is a conscious process, right? But also organic at the same time, because I wanted to not just use things that I have bought, but also found objects. So this part here, right, the cardboard will be a recycled object. And then I intended to use the cardboard as it was initially. And then maybe I thought I wanted to paint some strokes, some like, strokes like that. But then in the end, I decided against it. And then rather than looking at it as a canvas, right, I began to treat it more like an object. So I took away the first layer. Here, right, I actually shred away the first layer. So it reveals the kind of the rib structure inside the cardboard. And then in order to highlight that, right, I painted over it. So we can see a consistent pattern. And then the tablecloth, right, also I deliberately choose this kind of pattern. So that it's not so fanciful. And then at the same time, the colors are more muted, which is, muted colors are my favorite color actually.
So you also painted on the pranks as well, the white paint on the prank. So it's the whole composition?
Yeah, correct. I was trying to balance it. And because I used to study abstract painting, right? So I think it's just quite natural. I will look at them as different shapes that I can use. So the wall also sometimes become like a canvas for the support. And then at the same time, it's not so flat. So there will be a bit of relief, but the entire sculpture is not really independent. It can't stand on its own. Yeah.
Is that why the title called Unstate? Is it?
Yeah, actually Unstate is a series that I have done a long time ago.
Okay.
I have two different series. One is State Of and another one is Unstate. And I find that Unstate is very difficult to do because State Of is like I have an idea, right? And then I just do it. So then the sculpture in the end, they will not change. But Unstate is more like what I'm doing now, much more organic. And then there's a lot more potential in the sense that we can keep building on. And then the meaning would be not so fixed. So this would be like what I'm doing here. So yeah.
Thank you so much for the answers to my questions.
Yeah, thank you so much to
my question and comment.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so I realized both of you, or both of your work in this series, you guys are describing the artist's intuition, right? So this thing about artists' intuitivity towards creation, I think deserve a lot more attention than merely saying that I feel like, right? So, and I see it in both your works where you have in mind a general conception or approach, and then you allow yourself to almost become a open plane for this intuition to happen. And I think that every creative individual have a different experience of how that intuition comes about. Of course, from past experience to what you have done before already, to a sense of I guess my question is then, how would you say, would you think that you are at that moment when you say, okay, I'm going to do this, I don't know how I'm going to do it, and then you allow yourself to be an open plane, I suppose, for things to be absorbed. So you're hypersensitive, or what is your process? I suppose that's my question.
Shall we want to continue first?
I'm trying to digest.
Intuitiveness.
Intuitiveness, very hard to describe.
Sorry, I know that's why.
For me, I think I can understand what Mei Hsien was saying earlier when she always say that like I just pick this, pick that. You know, I happen to see this, I happen to see that. I understand where your question is coming from. I have been trying to understand this process as well. Actually, there are a lot of incidents like what she told me about this mind map, right? Like she told me that these lines actually form like an electrical circuit, which to me, it was not my intention. I just wanted to have lines to connect them together. That's all. That was my intention, you see. So to describe this intuitive process is, I think, quite difficult to rationalize it for me. And then I think, yeah, correct, past experience are very important. And then yeah, I think that's all. I do have experiences, right? Actually, I do certain installation in spaces. I didn't really look properly at the space, but then it so happened that after I did the installation, right, then everything comes together. So I think it's very hard to explain actually, because I still cannot explain it at the moment. Like why is it that we have certain awareness that is probably like higher than we actually can either verbalize or be able to use language to just tell you as it is. Maybe, you know, it's because the level is not there yet. Like there's no language that can explain as yet. But maybe in the future, yeah, it may happen. So yeah.
Mei Hsien, you want to add on? Yeah.
For me, I think it could be some hidden intention inside us that's very unconscious, and it reflected quite naturally when we select some works and how we praise certain placement, and how we praise the images in the zine is also part of the a very aesthetically or intuitively way to make the whole works flows. So in a way, it's more like your own practice and how you identify the kind of element in the works and how you can praise it in such a way that it flows well for myself, and hopefully the audience can find the certain kind of connections or the gaps that they can read from my works. So I would say it's more like artist practice your own practice, how you put all these works together intuitively again. Yeah.
I'm not satisfied with the answers from both of you. but what I guess what came out jump out at me from both your sharing is that that strong sense of using your intuition, and maybe not for now, but maybe at some point in time, I hope that we can sit together and share, even if it's an analogy of your own journey of this intuition, because I think everybody's journey of the intuition is different for art making, right? How it comes to you. I think like Xiao Yun say, using words may not be enough or sufficient to really communicate this intuition, and I think it's worthwhile to meditate upon. Yes, thank you very much. Any other questions from the floor?
Yeah, but I find both your works very interesting. There are like some commonalities that I can see. They are not like the actual formal kind of artworks that we normally see. Like they are constantly changing. They are never the same. Like Mei Hsien, you arrange your things around and then probably you won't get back the same thing again, in a way. Like what Xiao Yun also was doing. I think it's quite interesting, like the combination between painting and sculpture. And then as well as like things are constantly changing and constantly in a state of shift, and it will never be the same. That's very interesting to me, I feel. It's like the process is very important than the actual thing itself. So not like the actual thing is not important, but the process is even more important maybe. And how it gradually changes and develops along the way, which I find very inspiring.
Self-indulgent.
And I think that requires a lot of courage But I don't know because
Face, you mean?
yeah, using your own face in it, like for me, like if I do that, or it will require a lot of courage, I feel.
I think it's a bit too much for all the pages to have my face inside. I felt a bit too overwhelming. Yeah, when I look at it at the last, yeah.
But from our point of view, we don't really feel that way. But because you are pushing yourself, or you are trying to push yourself to something that you are feeling uneasy about, that's why you will feel that way probably. Right.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
All right. See you guys later. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.